Okay, so we're going to look at kind of a literature review here of from Eric. And what does the research say about standards-based grading? Standards-based grading um, has been very intriguing to me since I read uh, Grading and Assessment That Works by Marzano. I read that back in 2010. Really changed the way I viewed grading. I've never actually been in a completely standards-based grading school, um, but but I've used those kinds of philosophies to inform how I grade as much as possible, given the limits and requirements of the schools that I'm in. So you'll see this paper is from 2016 and published in 2018. Uh, so it's not actually out of date because the problems that are discussed still exist. The um, research has moved along a little bit, but not as much as you would think. It's pretty much settled at this point that standards-based grading um, improves outcomes for students. So first thing we need to talk about is kind of like the traditional method of grading. Some of the people who are listening to this might not be familiar with standards-based grading, but everybody's going to be familiar with the traditional grading, which is like the 100-point scale. You have a bunch of assignments, and those assignments may be in different categories, or they may be assigned different numbers of points. And in the end, that comes out to a number of points and a grade. If you're in an international baccalaureate school, it'll be a little bit different than this. But in traditional schooling, that's the way it works. And um, hey, you'll see here Marzano's 2000 research on this meta research shows there's no meaningful research to report uh, that the traditional grading practices improve student outcomes. So, and we can understand why that might be. When people say actually that school has remained basically the same for the last 100 years, a lot of that it comes from this grading practice more than anything else. So the question is to why change? I mean, and whenever standards-based grading gets put into a school, I see a lot of teacher pushback. Even some standards-based grading um, kind of techniques, philosophies put into a more traditional grading, there's a lot of teacher pushback. It's not fair to the students who did the work or something like that. So, but the ultimate answer about why changing to standards-based grading comes down to the fact of what does the grade mean. So, um, my favorite example for this is I have two students, and one student really just aces all of the unit tests and the midterm and final in a kind of like a traditional system, but has problems with habits of work and um, doesn't do classwork or turn it in, may do half of it but not turn it in, doesn't do any homework, and in the end, that student ends up with a C. And in traditionally, we're all like, well, yeah, he deserves a C. He didn't do the classwork. But it's important to realize he really got high scores on all of the exams, so he obviously understood the content. And my second student, who I'm going to raise as an example here, does pretty poorly on all the exams. Gets, barely passing. We'll say a C in a traditional environment, um, but is very diligent. Works very hard to overcome problems and does all of the classwork, submits all the classwork, gets all of the homework done, possibly with the parental help, and really just looks for that extra credit anywhere they can get it, and in the end comes out with a B. So I've got one student who really, really understands the material and is getting a C, and another student who pretty obviously is not doing very well on the material, and gets a B. So that B and that C don't really mean anything. And I mean, that's true. You can say, well, two students got an 88, two students got an 88. What does that tell you about them? It doesn't tell you really anything about them in the traditional grading situation. So standards-based grading is a bit different, where you have some standards or objectives. In bilingual systems that I've done this in, we kind of focus more on objectives than standards, because where we may be teaching to some local standards, but we're also trying to pull in, more international standards too, and get some kind of hybrid system. So therefore, we don't have like a comprehensive set of educational standards, and we may look more at objectives, the major objectives that are the most important over this grading period, and we'll figure out how students do. So there's the additional problem with traditional grading, where we start. I'm a math teacher, so I'll start with something like pretty simple, solving one equations in one variable. So solving equations in one variable, they may start out and not be able to do it at all. So their first 3 or 4 assignments that you give them in a traditional assignment kind of environment, they do really poorly, and maybe they're slower than the rest of the class in getting it, and they only kind of like get that eureka moment towards the end of the unit. And the last couple of assignments, they do really well and show that they really, really understand it. Something triggered in them, and they go, "Oh yeah, I get it." Under a traditional system, those will all be averaged, and they'll get a really poor score, which doesn't reflect what their competency is at the end of the unit. So that's one other thing that we need to change. And this is U.S. focused, of course, but it's true everywhere. We really should be focusing on whether students have the skills that they need, whether those skills are, like higher order thinking skills, or whether they're, complete the square skills. We really need to focus on, as departments and as schools, on what are the most important skills, and that students need to have during this grading period, and our students meeting those requirements. So I've really kind of talked about what standards-based grading is a little bit, but for each of those objectives or standards, we'll rate a student on whether they're generally on a 4-point scale, whether they're exceeding the standards, meeting the standards, approaching the standards, or not approaching the standards. And approaching the standards may be additionally defined by something like they can meet the standards with some help. Not approaching standards may be additionally defined by they can approach the standards, with some help. And that kind of helps us understand what those 4 ratings mean. And optimally, everybody in every class will be at 3 for every objective, or 3 or more. But that doesn't happen. And the question is, when the grading period is over, should the students be able to go back and try again? And generally, standards-based grading will agree the students should go back at any point and be able to show that they have competency in the standards or the objectives. So here we go. That's principle. Let's see. Principle 1, grades should have meaning. So when we do that, when we put out a grade report that has a list, grade reports for standards-based grading are like multi-page affairs. So when we put out that grade report, it has like all of the objectives and where the students are on the objectives, and then the teacher will have generally a comment regarding um, regarding overall how the student is doing in that subject. Our second principle here um, is multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning based on feedback, and this is important. So students can show whether they're proficient or not. They can show growth when they have multiple opportunities. It kind of incentivizes that growth mindset. I've heard some teachers say, students sit down and take the same test over and over and over, and that's not standards-based grading. So students shouldn't be taking the same exam over and over and over. They should be testing the same skill in different ways, possibly with different prompts, but they have additional ways additional attempts to show their proficiency. And generally, if I'm in a traditional grading environment, I will provide opportunities to improve grades. I'm one of these teachers who's not really that serious about late. I'll make sure that it's a comment on the report card, but I don't care that you did it late as far as the content goes. As far as work, habits of work, then yes, that's very important, and I emphasize that strongly. But students need to be able to show that they're improvement. They need to be able to see their improvement, and I have put together previously spreadsheets where students can self-track their own improvement over time and see that they're getting better, so that they understand that they start out, not being able to do things, and they get better as they practice those more. I think that's an important life lesson for students. I recently heard the example of riding a bike. When somebody starts riding a bike, they do very poorly, and it doesn't really matter if it takes them 5 tries or it takes them 14 days to learn how to ride a bike, because they're going to be learning to ride a bike. They're going to be riding a bike for multiple years after they learn to ride a bike. So, that timing is not that important. Principle 3, putting homework and extra credit in its proper place. So homework, I'm a huge fan of homework, just for driving that habits of work. Students get used to doing homework. They want to do homework. Hopefully, for schools that I'm in, we try to make sure that the students can complete the homework by themselves, that it's leveled appropriately for them. So we try to have adaptive homework or something similar. Extra credit, I really don't offer extra credit in my classes at all. But again, I do offer retakes and stuff like that. So that takes the place of that extra credit. And really, this whole kind of, did you turn your work in on time? Did you do your homework? Are you doing extra credit? That all gets pushed off into a separate grading category, which is, that habits of work ethic, something like that. And we may break those down: timeliness, class participation, and stuff like that. We may break those down. So you can see meta-analysis, the research on homework, described a connection between homework and student learning lasting through the unit test, but not any longer. That can be the case especially in the way that homework is traditionally assigned. But for example, math homework often have adaptive programs that go back and recycle automatically for us, so students aren't just doing the practice of the things we're doing in class. They're doing additional things that happened before, and they're adjusted for difficulty based on the student ability. So that kind of mitigates that problem where homework only works on the unit that you're in. this kind of homework that we assign, we traditionally see a correlation between exam scores and homework of about R squared of about 0.66, which is really, really strong. About as strong as you can expect from homework. So extra credit is problematic. The students who would benefit the most from completing it are often not taking advantage of it. Yes, it's a big problem. So I have 2 students who basically failed my course last semester due to not showing up. So giving them additional time over this long Chinese New Year break, but not surprisingly, they're not going back and showing competency in the skills that they need to show for the same reasons that they didn't show up. And that's a kind of a whole school or grade level discussion. How do we fix those problems? And I think we're going to try to do that as our school, as a school. Secondary is involved in on those 2 kids already. So this research closes out saying we can do better, and we certainly can do better than the traditional system. Even if you're in the traditional system, there are things you can do, and Marzano's grading and assessment that work has a whole final section. The whole last third of the book basically is devoted to if you're stuck in a traditional grading system, what can you do to work within that and still have much more focus on student growth, growth mindset, and competency, rather than averaging out scores on a bunch of assignments. So that's it. I'm going to put the link to this in the description. I encourage you to go through and read it. It's 6 pages. It's actually only about 4 pages. It's an easy read and really helps you understand why maybe you should move to standards-based grading. Also in the description, I'll put a link to a playlist I've got on standards-based grading that you can check out as well. Thank you for listening.